Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Street Peace Coalition on CAN TV, Channel 21, on your Chicago Comcast dial. My name is Minister Michael Muhammad. I'm one of the co-founders and visionary of the Street Peace Coalition. We are an ad hoc, so to speak, violence prevention group that seeks to address and remediate issues related to violence, specifically as it affects and pertains to the black community. And so this is our second show of the new season, and we are very happy to be coming back over these airwaves to share with you our views, our opinions, our assessments, our outlook on the issue of violence, specifically in Chicago and abroad, and in particular as it affects black people in Chicago. On last week, on our first show, I began to lay out for you a background narrative on violence in Chicago. And I talked about the ongoing reputation that Chicago, especially black Chicago, if you will, has acquired with regard to violence, gun violence, and shootings. And we talked about the numbers of shootings and deaths by gun in Chicago. And so tonight I just want to move the needle a little bit further along those lines, because one of the things we have to do when it is appropriate, and well, it's always appropriate, but when it is possible, one of the things we have to do is deal with the narrative of violence in the black community. Chicago is probably the nation's, probably the most segregated city in the United States. The history of Chicago is one of ethnicities in which people of specific ethnicities have been able to recreate ethnic enclaves in Chicago. And so historically, the Irish have lived in Irish enclaves, the Italians, the Asians, the Chinese live in Chinese enclaves, the Koreans live in Korean enclaves, etc. And so Chicago's historically is very segregated along ethnic lines. And of course, when it comes to black people in Chicago, we have evolved or emerged from certain specific areas in the city that we gravitated toward and populated during the so-called Great Migration from the South. And so it is not unusual that black people live among themselves. This has been the natural, normal track of people in Chicago, that we have all tended to build up neighborhoods that would respect a specific culture, a specific cultural way of being and living. And so in those enclaves, we've tried to recreate certain values, certain standards, certain norms, certain ways of creating family and community. Everybody has done that. Black Chicago, in the generic sense, is no different. But what is different about Black Chicago being segregated is that in the backdrop of poverty and in the backdrop of racism, it has made the black community the scapegoat, the target, the object of unfair practices and policies. And it has also made black people in Chicago very concentrated in on ourselves without the benefit of a proper way of relating to each other based upon culture, based upon the things that come out of culture, like specific ways of creating family and community, specific rituals and holidays and language and religious practices that would be unique to a people who retain their culture from their mother country. We are pretty much the only group of people that have had to scramble, if you will, and search kind of impromptu, kind of ad hoc, kind of helter-skelter, if you will, to find some sense of cultural connection to a whole continent and not necessarily a specific country. And so our experience here has left us with certain after and really recurring effects of the social experimentation that has happened to black people in America in general and specifically in Chicago. And so we've got to understand we cannot have a short memory when it comes to social development. If we're going to be honest, if we have an honest interest in resolving the issues related to violence in the black community, we cannot speak about it in a vacuum. We cannot deal with it in isolation, even though we have been treated with policies of isolation. The policy has created unnatural causes and effects in our community that are perpetuating to this very moment. And so if we're going to deal with remediating and resolving and reducing violence in any significant way, anybody that has a genuine interest, anybody that's trying to provide any credible leadership to deal with the violence issue in Chicago is really fooling themselves if they try to deal with it without dealing with the background narrative. And so what we're trying to do here on the Street Peace Coalition show every week is infuse you with some broader perspective. Because without that broader perspective, we will continue to believe the mainstream narrative. And that mainstream narrative, unfortunately, is very desensitized, it's very mechanized, it's very ritualistic, it is very superficial, and it's very self-serving of people of wealth and power and position in a way that allows them to deal with violence in the black community strictly from a crime and punishment perspective. And so this is what's going on right now, wholesale in Chicago. It's at a level we've never seen. And it's been at this level for quite some time, but it's really gone to a whole nother level with the current city administration. What do I mean? I mean that anytime the government, the city government, finds that it is appropriate to dismantle educational institutions, which serve as the first point of remediation. It serves as the first stop for a human life beyond the arms and reach of its parents or guardians. And so if you have a proper educational system, it will begin to remediate some of the deficiencies that parents may have when by the time they relinquish their child to that educational system. It has the greatest opportunity to instill some sense of right and wrong, some sense of civility, some sense of the rules of civilized society, some sense of history and culture as it pertains to that group of students. It has the best opportunity to provide for the child a contrast between good role models and bad role models, effective parents or effective adulting, if you will, versus ineffective adulting, to shape the hopes, aspirations, the worldview of a child. In a proper educational system, a child has an opportunity to reframe the world a little bit further outside of the bubble that may exist in the child's home that may be limiting the child's view of the world and view of his or herself. And so when a government decides that it will gut and dismantle and radically transform the educational experience of children and access to proper culturally competent education, then this feeds into the narrative of crime and punishment. Because when you eliminate the educational process and refuse to invest and reinvigorate and double down on creating cultural relative educational institutions that can connect with the children of that neighborhood or that community, now you're setting up a dynamic where the personality now becomes antisocial, because it becomes disconnected to a critical process in human development. And so antisocial behavior or tendencies that may have been there when the child entered the educational system, now they're exacerbated, and that child now loses a scope of what it means to have proper human behavior. And so let me pause right there and go to the caller. Caller, are you there with your question or comment?
Yes, sir. This is Ray. I'm so glad to see you back on TV because you're the main man.
All right, Ray, thank you.
This is why children can't learn. They're afraid to go outside. They're afraid to go to school. They're afraid that if they go to school and they get beat up by a bully, and the teachers don't do nothing because they're told not to do anything. How can a person learn anything when they're afraid from their home to the school and back home? That's why the kids are afraid to learn, because they're afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you for listening and calling in. Yes, I agree, but we need to go a little bit further. As I began last week, we have to understand that the root of the problem, and one of the roots causes of this condition in the black community, is the breakup of the traditional family in the black community. And this condition was exacerbated by federal and state policies, specifically, especially federal policies on the war on drugs, which targeted black men, and federal housing policies, which targeted black men, and the separation of black men from their families based upon median family income, if you will, or financial resources. So when your family is in poverty and you needed federal assistance, then it became a de facto practice that the father, the male figure, could not be home in the house with the women and the children for them to receive help just to subsist in society. And so this exacerbated the breakup of our homes. And so, and that, along with the emergence of the crack cocaine epidemic through the 80s into the 90s, when you combine all of these factors now, you now today, we have a generation, maybe almost two generations of parents who don't know really what it means to be effective, competent, and cogent at parenting. And so we have parents today who don't know what the proper healthy boundaries are between child and adult. We have parents today who are either afraid of their children or themselves are not taking on the responsibility of being more of a parent and trying to be more of a friend and creating a home life where children are not made to respect authority. Children are not made to respect adults. And so if that's happening in the home, when they go to school, they have no respect for teachers. They have no respect for administrators. They have no respect for security. They have no respect for the other adults who are there trying to do a job to help them go through the processes of life. So this starts in the home. And so many of our children are not receiving a proper foundation at home. So when they go to school, you can tell what kind of parents I have by the way I relate to other adults who are authority figures in the school system. So if I cuss teachers out, then 9 times out of 10 I have an unhealthy relationship with my parent or parents. If I am a young man and I challenge grown men in school who may be a teacher, an administrator, or a security guard, I'm willing to fight with them, I'm willing to threaten them, then this is telling you that I have an unhealthy, improper, or a non-relationship with my father or a positive father figure in my life. This is just a we have something we call transferable skills when we talk about job readiness. So when we do job readiness training, we talk to people about transferable skills. Well, there's some transferable skills. So when we see how our children are acting in school today, these are skills that are being transferred from the home to the school environment. So if you talk to a certain child that has a respect for a teacher, a healthy respect, or even a fear that they don't want to be in trouble with the teacher. They want to comply. They want to do what they need to do to be respected and be respected. Then this child is demonstrating transferable skills that began in the home. And so when the home is broken, when the home is dysfunctional, when the home is in chaos, that child brings those skills from the home life into the school, and you have an exacerbation of those they're negative skills, but they're still transferable skills. So let me go to the caller. Caller, go ahead.
Yes, sir. This is Ray once again. That's why I watch the show. You come right down to it. You don't care. You don't care if you hurt any feelings. None of that stuff. That's why I watch it. But the thing is about these kids, some of the girls are 13 years old. So how the heck are they going to take care of a baby, let alone get the respect, when the grandmother is only 28, 29 years old? So that family's almost 90% not going to make it. It's because of some of the rules that the government made, but it's mostly because they made the choices. The young men today make the babies and they're gone. The only time they come back is to get a bit of that welfare check. And I'm telling you that's got to stop. But come on, we could do better, a lot better. Let's quit all this stuff about, well, it's not his fault. It's not. Whose fault is it? They're the ones that are making the decisions. So if they make the bad decision, like you say, tell them that they're making a bad decision. Don't be afraid to. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, here's what we have to understand, Ray and anyone else that's viewing us. All of us make bad decisions as young people. That just is the nature of young people. In fact, as adults, we still make a lot of bad decisions. The only thing that protects us from our bad decisions is the quality of infrastructure that is in place in our life. So we may have immediate family. We may have what we call family of origin, immediate family. We may have extended family. We may have a network of friends and associates. We may have made enough consistent decisions that when we make a bad decision, even though we suffer some of the effects, the totality of our consistent better decisions insulates us from the bad decisions. But young people, if they're not habilitated properly, this is we cannot blame young people for what they are. This is cowardice. This is intellectual, moral, and spiritual cowardice and hypocrisy on our part as adults, that we want to continue to blame young people for their lack of ability to make good decisions. You don't come into the world and automatically become a upstanding adult without input. And based on the quality of the input you receive from adults and other dominant social institutions, we can predict the probability of you becoming a upstanding citizen. This is why the federal government, through the prison industrial complex and the criminal justice system, they take a keen look at test scores starting in the 3rd and 4th grade, and they extrapolate based upon our behavior and our test scores in the 3rd and 4th grade, and they make a pretty good projection on the number of prisons they will need to build in the next 10 to 20 years. And so, but this is so we cannot divorce how we as adults have socialized or habilitated or failed to do so with our young people. And this is why I'm talking about the broader narrative. We got to deal with policies. We got to deal with legislation. We got to deal with the mindset of those who control government and implement those policies and the impact it has on adults who produce children and then are either capable or not capable of producing a quality human being as a parent. And so when we deal with this, we've got to look at the after effects of a specific modern narrative that began with Reagan in '81, and it went to an apex from '93 to '01 under Clinton. And so we exist today in the city of Chicago where this crime and punishment narrative is the easy answer. So we put over $300 million into the Chicago Police Department budget. We allow them to pay out over $700 million in settlement for police brutality, assassination of citizens by the police. We allow them to run up over $200 million in overtime because we believe that the black community, the only way to deal with us is from a crime and punishment scenario, while at the same time we're saying CPS has an over $665 million deficit, but we paid out over $700 million in police misconduct settlements. So the deficit for schools, we're willing to pay out a little more than the amount of the deficit for schools. We have no problem raising taxes on people to pay out that to the police for misconduct, but we say nothing about an administration that strips the schools of the same amount. I'm saying we have a psychosis and a pathology in Chicago that has everything to do with a false narrative that is seeded with prejudice, bias, racism, elitism, classism that isolates the black community when it comes to crime and violence in a way that is unfair, unjust, and has to be dealt with at every level. And so we cannot allow this false narrative to continue. You know, we will put $26 million into Safe Passage, while we could have taken that $26 million and put into enriching schools that handle black and brown babies boys and girls. And so it's a mentality, it's a philosophy. And so before I go off, I just want to put up our contact information. You give us a call, leave us a voice message. We have our email down there if you want to shoot us an email. You can get that. I put our website up last week. I'll come back next week and put the website up. But anybody that wants to get in contact with us, if you want to volunteer with us, we need volunteers. We need help. We need people to come out and get involved and help us make an impact in some of these neighborhoods with some of our young people in particular. We cannot just sit on the sidelines and run our mouth. We got to put some skin in the game if we want to affect the quality of life in our community. And so I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Our time is up for this episode. We look to see you next week at 5 p.m., same time, same station, signing off for the Street Peace Coalition. Thank you.